Welcome to GS Podcast number 134. I'm very pleased to welcome Andrew Doyle back to the podcast. Before I present you with this outstanding conversation, just a quick reminder that you can help support what is a one-man operation by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker, or you can visit gspellchecker.com/support to see alternative methods of supporting me financially. If you can't do any of that, just make sure you leave a review wherever you're listening to this. Share it about on social media. I'm very pleased Andrew's back. I really like Andrew. Very clear thinker, has a background in critical thinking, and it really shows in his writing. And I very much enjoy his stand-up as well. So incredibly funny and thoughtful guy, which is a dangerous combination, as he's found out recently on Twitter with some of the vitriol and opinions that have come his way. So make sure you check out his writing over at Spiked. You can often see him on Sky News in the morning as well, talking sense, and his comedy's brilliant, and he's on tour now, so I'll put a link in the show notes where you can pick up tickets for his current tour. He's also one half of the excellent satirical character Jonathan Pye, co-writes that with Tom Walker, and that's just going from strength to strength at the minute, which is really pleasing to see. It's great to see this appetite for alternative comedy that really puts the boot in on some of the dogmas that have got a free pass over the last few years. So lots of good stuff in this conversation. If you've got any feedback, let me know at gspellchecker. Also, let Andrew know that he can still have faith in the goodness of humanity by sending him a few kind words on Twitter. You can find him at andrewdoyle_com. And make sure you go and buy tickets to see his latest gigs. You will not be let down. I assure you. You're not having your money back if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly confident that you'll be pleased with what you see. You can keep up to date on the podcast, on my writing, on my YouTube channel, all the events I'm involved in at gspellchecker.com. Enjoy. There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it? I'm very pleased to welcome the return of writer-comedian Andrew Doyle to the podcast. Andrew, good to have you back.
Hello, good to speak to you.
Excellent. So you're currently in the middle of a new tour, and how's that going so far?
Yeah, it's good. I'm in Bath at the moment. Bath or Bath? Well, I say Bath. But
In a bath or in Bath?
No, I'm in Bath.
Okay.
A beautiful Roman city. Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I started the tour in Reading, and I had... it's sort of like, because it's my first ever tour, I'm sort of doing a mix of old and new stuff, but really the second section is all the newer material about what's been happening to me over the past year, politically, and also the way in which people have sort of, I suppose, I've been alienated by a number of friends over my politics, to the degree where people are calling me Nazi again. And so I'm sort of addressing this in the show. But the problem is I had this whole conceit written for the show which just didn't work, and it was quite a central structural conceit. So basically I had to rewrite the whole second section overnight, and I've implemented all the changes, and now it's working.
What goes through your head when you're trying to do something and it's not working? I mean, how do you resist the urge to sort of curl up in a fetal position and just cry?
I think what goes through my head is I should have done more previews. First thing. But no, it's fine, because actually, even while it's not working, it's helpful, because you think to yourself, well, now I know what I need to do. And I clocked halfway through, because I was doing a sort of conceit where I was almost in a different character mode. And I think it confused the audience. And but I knew it. Halfway through, I thought, I know what I need to do to make this work now. Like, even on stage while it was going wrong. and that was a really liberating, good thing. I mean, that's the thing about stand-up comedy is it doesn't immediately go right. You have to try it out with an audience for it to work. And of course, I'm also dealing with things in the show now which are happening right now. I mean, I've got a section about things that have literally just happened in the news. So every day things keep happening. So this is the sort of show, because so much of it is about the degradation of political discourse and the lunacy that we're seeing from social justice activists, that it needs to be updated every day because things are happening so often now, so frequently. So I have to keep rewriting, which is great. That's really a good thing.
Keeps you on your toes. But I mean, I suppose because you're not doing standard kind of garden variety, inoffensive observational comedy. You're really grappling with quite sensitive and prominent political issues that's divided the entire country, and you're doing that by sort of touring the entire country. So I mean, these things that might land well in the north, which might not be as well received in the south. I mean, how do you find the response to what you're saying depending on where you are? Because it can split the room, really, can't it?
It can, but it's really great actually, because for instance, when I was in Brighton, there wasn't a single Leave voter. Last night in Bath, for some reason, it seemed like a 50-50 split. And that was really great. And also last night, I had lots of Lib Dem voters in. And nowhere else has there been any, really, because there aren't many left, let's face it. So, because I forgot that Bath is a predominantly Lib Dem stronghold, isn't it? So, yeah, so that's really great. And I'm also going to be going to Sheffield and various places up north. I've been in Glasgow. And the politics is different and the attitudes are different. And, but, and that to me is great, because ultimately at the core of the show is the idea that, we've lost that ability to disagree politely, to even just to still get on and recognize what people are actually saying, rather than just sort of project what you think they are or demonize your political opponent. And so therefore it sort of plays into my hands if the audience is a bit divided, because that's what it's about. Yeah. And because I acknowledge that in the show. And I also deliberately sort of interrogate what I'm doing while I'm doing it, which I think is really interesting, because there's been a big movement recently in the comedy establishment to move towards a more kind of woke, inclusive, socially aware, socially conscious form of comedy, which I actually think is damaging to the art form. So I'm sort of addressing that by doing it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I read your piece on that in Spiked, and I think it's absolutely spot on to say this idea of woke, responsible comedy is not brave. It's not moving the needle. It's actually very. I think you said it's very establishment as well.
I think just historically in any art form. I know it sounds very grand when you talk about stand-up comedy as an art form, but it is. But if you go back in history, whenever art has moved on, there's always been an element of risk to it. There's always been an element of that's how the avant-garde works. So
almost blasphemy in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, but it doesn't work if, for instance, I mean, Camille Paglia made this point about the art piece, Piss Christ, where there was a crucifix. It was a sculpture of a crucifix, just basically in a sort of vat of urine or something. I didn't see the piece, but I read about it. And what she was saying is this isn't shocking, or she said it was banal. And the reason it's banal is that kind of thing now gets awards and gets accolades and gets applauded, and everyone says, oh, look how brave this is. But that's the opposite of brave. There's no risk to that, because it's not a dangerous target, is it? Christianity is not a dangerous target anymore. So that's the same in stand-up. I think the same thing's true.
That's very true. And also comedy in Britain, it's this sort of like a template now, isn't it? This you do Live at the Apollo and you appear on panel shows, and I don't think they're going to sort of handpick comedians for that who are known for being quite anti-Islam or going for things that are risque. And it almost feels like career suicide for a comedian if they want to go down the traditional comedy path now. It seems very, laid out for them. And I think people who do cross that line into dangerous territory, they're almost like a human sacrifice in the sense they're the ones that they make it, they give other comedians permission to venture there, but they also end the career at the same time. So you can kind of understand a little bit why people are reluctant to be a bit more edgy.
Totally. And I'm not interested in taking pot shots at other comedians who go the route and go on Live at the Apollo and go on Mock the Week. I'm friends with a lot of them, and I respect what they do, and it's not about that. And I also, and a lot of comics are instinctively mainstream, right? A lot of comics are observation, and that sort of comedy is really hard. Like it's not the case that I'm saying everyone should be trying to break boundaries in comedy and all the rest of it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that for certain types of comedy, if that's your instinct, then that's what you should be doing. And it certainly is my instinct. And I think ultimately the problem we have is that you've got the establishment. I mean, I mentioned this in the article that the Edinburgh Comedy Awards last year, the head of the Edinburgh Comedy Awards, Nika Burns, opened the Fringe last year by making a speech where she celebrated woke comedy and said she was looking forward to the new generation of woke comics who are going to set the parameters of what is acceptable. Now, to me, that's the opposite of what stand-up should be doing. But that just goes to show the dissonance between the establishment point of view about where we should go, which is also shared by TV commissioners and all the mainstream people and critics, by the way, as opposed to the appetite that people actually want. People in the country, they want their comedians to be treading on their toes a bit, straying into these areas, making them rethink things. That's what they want. So there is, again, as we've seen with Brexit and other things, there's a massive dissonance between what the establishment thinks and what most normal people think.
That's really interesting, and that might bring us on to the recent Gillette advert fiasco, because there seems to be a massive disconnect, as you just said, between people who are commissioners or marketers who try and pander to this idea of wokeness, and what we see time and time again is that the general public really do not care for it. They're not happy about identity politics at all. They're not interested in it. A lot of them. A lot of people just want to get on with their lives. And I was wondering, what was your thought on this Gillette advert that seemed overtly to be attack on masculinity on the face of it?
It's very funny to me that Gillette, who of course made they've made their entire business on the basis of the differences between men and women, of course, and they're now trying to undo evolutionary history with an advert. It's nonsense, you know. Of course, there's a biological connection between aggression and testosterone. Let's not pretend there isn't. But the other thing, of course, is that what's annoying about the advert isn't really the message of the advert. I mean, the idea that if two boys are fighting at a barbecue, a responsible adult wouldn't stop them is ludicrous. Like, everyone knows that and already agrees with that, right? No matter how many barbecues you have, I love that the way that they associate toxic masculinity with the ability to run a good barbecue.
You've obviously never been to one of my barbecues with child cage matches. It's a staple up in the north. Well,
and I'm a vegetarian, so this doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah, me too. I'm one of those.
But so what it is about the advert isn't really that message. I mean, it isn't that. It's the idea of being hectored. It's the idea of being sermonized to. It's the idea that a massive, a multi-million evil corporation is standing there saying, we're morally superior than you, and you've got a lot to learn from us. No, we don't. You're not good people. You're avarice embodied.
Yeah.
You know, this is ludicrous. So that's why people are annoyed. And then, of course, you get the backlash. You get people saying, oh, why are all these snowflakes outraged about an advert? They're not outraged. They just find it really hectoring and annoying. But of course, I also think that Gillette know that, and I assume they must know that the majority of people can see through this stuff and don't like being lectured at. But they also know that they've got a lot of retweets out of this. I mean, we're talking about it right now. I think there is a cynical aspect to all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that the idea of creating controversy for awareness, isn't it? And and psychologically, I think we're told time and time again, if you want to inspire people or move people to a more reasonable place, you have to be more positive in your approach and your message. I mean, I think Gillette missed a trick there. They could have, on the face of it, the idea is don't be a man and don't be a dick, I suppose, if I'm being generous. Yeah. And they could have basically just portrayed all the positive aspects of masculinity. If they'd have projected that image, that could have been more inspiring to younger men who perhaps are a little bit, at a crossroads in where they're going in their life. But you've touched on an interesting point there about how people are being mocked as snowflakes now for having an opinion against it. So the state of discussions is not great at the minute, is it?
It's really not. I mean, the whole conceit of this, the idea of toxic masculinity is ludicrous. We need to find a way just to not even take that seriously anymore. I mean, like you said, they could have elevated the positive aspects that are associated with traditional masculinity, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't choose to do that. The implication of the advert is that to be male is in itself toxic, and it isn't. And it's also based on the idea that men instinctively have these rapacious qualities. Now, this is sort of old school second wave feminist stuff. You won't find men who think that rape is a good thing, right? You don't need to be told that in this way. Like it's just not true. So it's a myth. And we shouldn't really take it all that seriously. But of course, the problem is that when you've got establishment figures and corporations pushing this stuff, then you have to take it seriously. When it becomes mainstream news, you have to address it because it's a false narrative. That's why.
Yeah. So coming back a bit closer to home now, I suppose you're on Sky News speaking about offensive limericks. Essentially, this is where we are now. A gentleman was contacted and interviewed by police because I think he either retweeted or liked a limerick on Twitter, which was critical of the idea that trans women are really women, and this was described by the police themselves as a non-crime, but it was logged as a hate incident. So where are we now in terms of the fact that the police force is taking an active interest in what we tweet online, whether or not it might be a crime, and still following through and investigating it and logging it, even when it's not a crime?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been going on for a while now. But of course, whenever you get these cases, it does illuminate a broader problem. I mean, the problem isn't just this one incident of one person having the police bother him over a non-crime. It's that this is now standard practice. That's what the worry is. That's the problem. I actually made a mistake. I don't think it is a limerick. So I was speaking on Sky News about it being a limerick because the newspaper article I was reading said it was. I've now looked into it a little bit more in the poem. It doesn't look like a limerick, or if it is a limerick, it's a very badly structured limerick. Anyway, it's not a good poem. That's not the point. The guy, he didn't even write the poem. He retweeted it and liked it. But apparently likes are now associated with endorsement, and therefore you are implicated. And the police contacted him and said they were obliged to investigate any reports of non-crime hate incidents. But this is something that I've known about for a while, because if you look at the Crown Prosecution Service website, and if you look at the government's new website about hate crime, there is a section on both about non-crime hate incidents. That shouldn't even be there. It shouldn't even be a consideration. And this is the problem with the whole hate crime movement, which is that the entire thing is predicated on perception. So anyone who perceives that a crime was motivated by prejudice logs it as a hate crime. Or if they perceive that something was said to them which was motivated by prejudice, then it becomes hate speech. And this stuff is dangerous because we don't know what's going on in people's heads. There's no possible way to intuit that, and it should have no role in the judicial system. I'm personally of the view that we should abolish the whole concept of hate crime. If somebody beats me up, that is already illegal. I don't need them to serve an extra year in prison because I'm gay. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's not something that we should have on the statute books. And similarly, hate speech, we should be seriously campaigning to abolish it as a concept, because people are entitled to say hateful things, because that's the nature of free speech.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a particularly hateful person. I think that's quite. I don't necessarily hate something in the sense people might think, hate and manifest. But I think I should be able to reserve the right to hate whatever I want and vocalize that. But I mean, it leads to a problem with it being so subjective. This idea of hate. And this is giving us a skewed picture of the cultural landscape in terms of hate crime, because as traditional levels of racial-based crime are declining, and as racism in general appears to me to be declining, we're actually getting these kind of ramped up figures every year. Hate crimes up by 40%, Islamophobia is up by X amount of percent, and interest groups in these areas are getting more funding based on these stats, and a lot of them are unquantifiable examples of hate incidents or things that have taken place online. I know one quite prominent interest group in this area was actually categorizing tweets that were sent from different countries, not even in England. So how is this good for our anti-racist campaigns in any way. It's not, is it?
No, it's not. This is a real problem, is that the statistics are inherently skewed. I mean, because they log everything, even just as someone phoning up and reporting what they perceive to be a hate crime as a hate crime. They log that. That's part of the statistics, but it hasn't even been investigated. So that, and when you add to that, of course, the police are actively trawling for this. I mean, you had, was it South Yorkshire who tweeted a couple of months ago saying, please let us know if anyone said anything hurtful or offensive, and we will log it as a non-crime hate incident. And all of this goes into the stats. So just as the country's getting more and more tolerant all the time, and at the same time, the statistics of hate crime are going up and up and up. This doesn't make any sense, does it? And it's because of these things that are happening, and we need to get that into perspective. The other thing is, of course, there was a famous spike in hate crime after the Brexit vote. To an extent, I'm not surprised that a few idiots were more emboldened to shout at people on the street and harass people, because we just had a major media campaign which spread the idea that there are 17 million racists in the country.
Yeah.
So of course that's going to happen when you have that kind of false narrative being pumped out there. But actually, the biggest spike after the Brexit vote was against LGBT people. That was the biggest spike in hate crime. So really, I don't see how that connects whatsoever, actually, to the Brexit debate. But anyway, yes, we have to get back to truth as opposed to false, convenient narratives for ideological purposes. And I think everything that we're talking about and what's happening here, the police are pushing a false narrative. That's worrying. But also generally, I mean, loads of things that have been happening recently are to do with false media narratives, and we have to go back to truth, whether it's convenient or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think this idea as well, the kind of people that shout racist epithets in the street in response to the Brexit decision don't necessarily strike me as the kind of people who had the capacity to register to vote and actually turn up at a polling station.
No, exactly.
I'm just not convinced.
And look, persistent harassment is already illegal.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need hate speech laws about that. We've already got them, and it's not hate speech.
All right. Well, as a final thought on this particular topic of the police overreaching, what do you think's driving this? I mean, I can't imagine that a police force, many of which are already overstretched, have issues with the actual serious crime, would want to spend time and manpower on investigating what's been said online. So who's driving this, do you think?
Yeah, that's the difficulty. I mean, I'm not trying to bash the police at all. They do a really difficult job, and they are overstretched and they are underfunded. But they are, like they say, obliged to investigate this stuff. I mean, any of us can phone up and say, oh, I've been hurt, my feelings have been hurt by a tweet, and they're obliged to look into it. That's mad. And that's across the country, by the way. So that's what I'm saying about this. We shouldn't think this is just some rogue policeman going too far. This is standard policy. And that's why it needs to be addressed seriously, because the police have absolutely no business doing it. But it's very telling that the Police and Crime Commissioner for Humberside, he's been doubling down on Twitter and mocking the people who've been complaining about this, just very casually mocking and blocking people who raise objections. This is the commissioner. It's like, this is a joke. So I think a lot of this is coming from above, from the politicians. And that's why it's going to be very hard to challenge, because actually this has been instigated by politicians. So when we go to our MPs and say, look, can we please stop moving in this authoritarian direction? That's really difficult, because you're going to the person who started it.
It is worrying, and it's especially worrying as well in terms of logging the hate incidents, that you don't even have to be the target or the victim. You could say, I saw somebody have a disagreement with X person, and I'm fairly convinced they only did that because that person was a woman or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever, and then that goes in the system as a hate incident as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to this, what you touched on earlier about this idea of trying to report the truth and trying to be interested in truth rather than filtering everything through your own biases. We saw a huge issue on that front recently, and not just the Twitterati and the blue tick brigade, but actual mainstream media outlets reporting, I was going to say factual inaccuracies, I'm just going to say lies, about a bunch of high school children in America from Covington Catholic School who, as far as I could see, were only guilty of wearing Make America Great Again hats. Yeah,
and instead of what was horrible about that, I mean, this is seriously unhinged, that major media outlets didn't even do basic due diligence on this case. They didn't do any research whatsoever. And it looks now that the original clip, which had been selectively edited, it looks like that was a deliberate act of clickbait. And everyone fell for it. Everyone got trolled, basically. And they just went with it. But then what disturbed me about this is not that story in itself, but the fact that they all doubled down on it and afterwards said, no, this is wearing that sort of hat is a racist provocation. That was something that I saw. Well, I'm sorry, but many millions of people support Trump and voted for Trump. It is not equivalent to a swastika, which is what people are now suggesting. But also, I mean, when you look at the whole, even when you watch the whole video, and now we have a very clear picture of what happened. The boys were being assaulted, abused, and provoked by the protest, the activists. What are they called? What's that group?
The Black Israelites.
That's right. Very obnoxious people. I mean, awful people. And you saw what they were shouting, and they were shouting, calling them incest babies and faggots and all this sort of stuff. And the boys were just waiting for a bus, and this the Native American guy inexplicably sort of goes up to them, starts beating the drum, and you know, I don't know what was going through his head. I don't know what was going through anyone's head there. But all I can say is it simply isn't the case that you had these aggressive bullies, these children. Let's not forget, teenagers, causing or making this sort of racist gesture. That didn't happen. We know that didn't happen. And yet I've seen 2 articles in The Guardian since it happened saying, no, we should stick with what we saw. We should stick with the facts as we originally reported. And actually, this is a big conspiracy on the right-wing media to now reclaim this story. This is incredible. And that is lies, isn't it? It's got to be at that point.
Yeah.
I would have thought.
I mean, I often wonder as well, because we're speaking from a UK perspective. Obviously, we take a keen interest in American politics, but we're not living under the Trump administration at the moment. So I think that tends to make us more objective, if anything. But I think we may fail in some way to quite get our heads around the culture there at the minute. I mean, I spent a good 2 days trying to convince people that maybe, just maybe, not everyone who wears the red MAGA cap is a Nazi. Yeah. And I think that's such a low bar to start a conversation with.
It is. I mean, unless you accept that, I mean, because you're going from a faith-based position there. So it's like arguing with a religious zealot at that point. I mean, I've met many people who were proudly wearing a Make America Great Again hat when I was over in America, and they just weren't. A lot of them were really lovely people, right? So you've got to get your head around this. Also, I just think it's really distasteful when you get mainstream media outlets attacking children and celebrities, asking for them to be doxxed, threatening violence towards them, or certainly encouraging violence towards them. And this is insane. And then everyone's now saying, oh, well, I mean, Mehdi Hassan at Al Jazeera is continually attacking this boy. He's the adult in the room. He needs to be a bit more responsible than this. And all he can talk about is look at this boy's privilege. Look at his privilege. He's from a rich family, so his parents have hired a PR firm. I'm not surprised. He's a child, and he's in the media spotlight. What do you expect him to do? But the problem is all these people can see is race. That's all they can see. They can only filter any story through this identitarian racial worldview. This is the worst thing about leftist identity politics, is the way in which it's rehabilitated racial thinking. And that's what's happening here. They can't see beyond race. So they see white and they see evil. You saw this, that when they were trying to justify their attacks on these boys, they were showing video clips of completely different boys catcalling a girl, right? Or they were showing photographs of completely different boys from 4 years ago behaving badly at a basketball game. And their argument is, well, all white straight boys are the same. Yeah. So therefore we can collectively decide that this person must be evil, and we can interpret this smirk as some sort of expression of fascistic sympathy because we've done that. This is completely it's stupidity. It's actual stupidity, but it comes from a cultish perception. That's why maybe it's not stupidity, but actually what's more disturbing about it, it's faith. It's a cult. It's religion almost. And you can't rationalize with someone like that. And that's why it's going to be so difficult for us to get beyond this, because it's like telling someone their God doesn't exist.
I mean, it's really interesting because after the full clip had been been shared and everyone had seen it, and we could see things were not what they were initially reported. There was this, like you say, doubling down, this idea that these boys are evil and they must be destroyed, school kids. And so this is where you, as you mentioned, people were digging up clips of completely irrelevant instances of teenage boys behaving a lot like teenage boys. It seems like people are just discovering teenage boys all of a sudden. So I suppose my question is, and this has been raised by many people before, we've realised that school kids are not off limits for the far left now. So
no, they're not. I mean, this is at best. I mean, even if the boys have been doing something awful and behaving, it's a school disciplinary matter.
Yeah,
it's not a matter for CNN. What the fuck is going on? At some point, we've got to say, look, this is just not good enough. And like you say, what really bugs me about I mean, I get trolled a lot on Twitter by people on the far left, and to be honest, it's the viciousness. I mean, they are unpleasant, nasty, vicious people. A lot of them, not all of them. I'm not trying to tar everyone, but I'm talking about specifically these sorts of people. But they think they're virtuous. They think they're doing some sort of moral good. It's really, really ugly. And I don't know what you do about that. When school children are a legitimate target, if they wear a certain hat, how do you even? It used to be the case that you could reason with people. That people you could talk to people, and you could get them to dial back their worst excesses. You can't do that if their premise is based on a completely irrational starting point. Like, how do you? And it used to be the case, I think, that people were educated out of this. But I always go on about it. But I just think if we can reinstitute critical thinking in schools, that's what these people are incapable of doing. We have a generation, my generation, in fact, who are seemingly incapable of critical thought. They don't know the basics. They don't know that once you insult someone, you've lost the argument. They don't know that you can't guess someone's motive. They don't know that you can't just interpret a smirk through your own bizarre racial identitarian lens. This is basic stuff that generations ago people would have known and understood, and we don't have that now. And that really, really troubles me.
Yeah, and I struggle with people as well a little bit, because I want to be correct. I don't necessarily want to be thought of as a good person. It doesn't really bother me if someone doesn't like me for an opinion. I want to be correct. So I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm very critical of Trump, not in the same hysterical way some are. But what I found as well is when I was saying, look, this isn't what's been reported, the people are lying about these children, I'm then accused of being a pro-Trumpist. I'm then accused of defending Republicans. And so how's it become to the point where you can't be fair in your approach to people you disagree with?
Exactly, because it's this cultish idea that if you're not with us, you're against us. And again, it's this conviction that even intelligent people have, that they know you must have sinister motives, right? I mean, I recently had a friend of mine who's one of the most intelligent people I know shouting at me in a public place, calling me a Nazi, a fucking Nazi.
Wow.
Telling me that I support Tommy Robinson, which I don't, and I've never, ever said that I did. Telling me that I'm a sort of right-wing nationalist, all the rest. I don't have a nationalist instinct. This is why I've met some people in UKIP who I like very much, actually, but I would never join UKIP or vote UKIP because I don't have that nationalist instinct. It is just lacking within me. I'm not saying I don't understand the concept, but I don't have it. But even someone I know, a personal friend who I've known for many years, can suddenly turn, and I know he's intelligent, and can shout at me and call me a Nazi and swear at me in public, and he believes it. Now, this is where we've got to. I don't know what to do about this. I think it is getting sort of out of control. How do you, well, maybe you can help me, because I don't know what to do,
It's extraordinary. The only way I can think to deal with it is to try and get people to understand this way of behaving is actually a massive self-own. It's an own goal, because, I mean, take the example of these children now. These kids, unfortunately, by all accounts, have actually been indoctrinated into this political way of thinking. I don't think maybe I'm being a bit patronising, but I don't think high school kids have a particularly advanced grasp of politics. So they're basically Trump supporters because their parents are or their peers are. Now, what's the chances that this experience, this public shaming, humiliation, vitriol, threats and aggression is going to make them reconsider their support for Trump?
Exactly.
They're just going to think the other side is absolutely mental.
Exactly. This is why I've always said I think the rise of the far right is really down to the left, because they're pushing people that way. They're making it more appealing, and they're allowing people on the far right who manipulate this kind of thing. I mean, we've seen the way the far right has completely claimed the free speech mantle. They're taking a beautiful principle, an important principle that we should all get behind. But because we've seen such hostility from the left about it, it looks like they own it. And then you get to the problem that it looks like anyone who defends free speech is therefore on the right. This is mad. No one has ever been persuaded by shouting at them and calling them a Nazi, right? That's never, ever, ever happened. So this has to stop. But I don't think it will stop. I think it's just going to get worse and worse and more tribal. And like you say, those kids, I mean, they don't know really the implications of Trump's policy, do they? I mean, they don't. But you saw a lot of people attacking them because they were on a school trip that was on a anti-abortion rally, right?
Yeah, breaking Catholic school is anti-abortion.
Exactly. That's basic fundamental Catholic doctrine. I say this speaking as a Catholic. I know this, right?
Yeah.
It's not, as many commentators said, a sign of evil bigotry against women. It's a different point of view. But that, if you demonize your opponent and an opposite viewpoint as just being plain evil, it vindicates you of the responsibility of having to address that person. But therefore, you just end up, like you say, in making that person more fixed in their own opinion, and you don't get anywhere either. It is completely counterproductive.
All right, well, maybe moving a little bit back to comedy now, and something which has been interesting me. I'm a huge fan. I was going to say was, but I am still a huge fan of Louis C.K. I think he's produced some exceptional comedy and TV over the years. Mm-hmm. And obviously his career ended in tatters after some accusations and information came out about him. And I might have this wrong, I've not looked at it in great detail, but it appears to me that he's not done anything illegal. He's just got some very strange sexual preferences and fetishes.
But again, the narrative has now changed. People, if they've got an agenda, don't care about the truth. And you'll see this because if you look at the Guardian article about this, it says explicitly Louis C.K. I'm talking about the Guardian article, which was about the recent set that was leaked, which people found offensive. And they used that as an opportunity to talk about, of course, the fact that Louis C.K. was embroiled in the whole Me Too scandal. But now the narrative in the Guardian is he masturbated in front of women without their consent.
Oh, wow.
Right. Now, that's what it says. It says that explicitly. He masturbated in front of women without their consent. That is not the case.
I mean, that's a crime for a start.
That's a crime. But that was never claimed. And Louis C.K. himself has said that's not. He specifically said he asked if he could do it beforehand, and they said yes, right? And then he wrote this sort of contrite apology, sort of saying, but now I understand that someone in my position of power asking someone that puts them in a very difficult position, and there's all of that going on, right?
Right.
So what they did is they came up with this phrase called sexual misconduct, and what that really means is a sexual practice that we find a bit gross. Okay, but this is not a crime. It takes away the autonomy of women in that situation. It suggests that they can't say no. They can't. There's a big debate about that. I wasn't there. I don't know the situation, but what I do know is just saying it was without consent is a false narrative that you're then pushing, and it changes the dynamic of the story. That's not responsible journalism.
Yeah. So there's that issue on one side, which I think is. It sounds horrible to say, but I just don't find it interesting. It doesn't really pique my curiosity.
But that seems to have been the focus, hasn't it?
Yeah. So now we've got this secondary issue of where, after an extended break from the public eye, he's now doing smaller comedy clubs, and like you say, some of this audio was leaked. And as the internet's suddenly discovering what teenage boys are like, they seem also to be discovering that Louis C.K. says things that aren't politically correct. And then
this is why the sexual allegations are relevant, because the stuff that he's saying in the recent leaked set is absolutely no different in tenor to what he has done before. But now we are reinterpreting his material through this lens that he is a sexual predator, right? So you make a decision that someone's a sexual predator, and then you look back at his material, and then there's nothing. I mean, the new set, it was a work in progress set, and it was really funny. I don't laugh out loud at many things, but I did when I listened to that. It's funny. He's objectively brilliant in terms of his craft, his stagecraft. You might say he's not, I don't like his humor or whatever. That's different. That's a subjective thing. But in terms of his stagecraft, he is very, very strong. And the way he writes and his turn of phrase and all the rest of it. And it was a really funny set. But now it's being reinterpreted. But the man is a monster. We know he's evil. And therefore, we can't treat this as comedy. I mean, when the Me Too allegations originally happened, there was a ridiculous article, again in The Guardian, I'm sorry, but I read it obsessively, saying that Louis C.K., if you laugh at a Louis C.K. joke, you are now complicit in sexual assault, effectively. It's bonkers. And this was written by a guy who writes comedy. This comedy writer who doesn't have the basic understanding of what comedy is. Or what laughter is.
Well,
this
talking of laughter, I'm pretty sure you pointed this out, actually. So we have this recording of him giving this set, and it sounded like it was going down a storm to me for the people who were there. But I think
really laughing a lot because it was funny.
I think The Guardian or another publication reported about uncomfortable silences or gasps or the audience not being impressed. Yeah. And on one hand, we have an issue here where, like you say, comedy's subjective. You're perfectly within your right to say that's not funny. You can even say I find it offensive, sure. Yeah. But to lie and say people there weren't finding it funny is a completely different thing, isn't it?
So now that we've got this, and it goes back to what we've been talking about all along, with this normalisation now of basically the agenda is more important than the facts. Journalistic integrity is out the window seemingly, and this is a problem because Trump pushes this narrative of fake news. Well, now I'm thinking, yeah, he's right. Yeah. That's a real shame because I never want to be agreeing with that man.
Yeah, he's on point on this topic, and he just recently tweeted out about how the actions of BuzzFeed and Huffington Post opinion pieces have led to their own downfall, basically, because of the lies and fake news they push, and people have responded to that by saying Trump's celebrating job losses in the USA. So they're not grappling with the issue. But I suppose on a positive note, there's this whole idea of get woke, go broke, isn't there? We see it where people don't understand that the general public are not interested and don't care for identity politics, and when they push too hard in this direction, eventually it leads to their downfall. So are we at a tipping point, do you think, where maybe, and I know that more and more independent content producers are doing well off the back of this, they become trusted sources. I know there's a few crowdsourced online magazines now that are earning a good reputation for being truthful and objective, who are doing better than some mainstream publications. So are we seeing a shift here, do you think?
I hope so. And of course, the problem, of course, is that so much of this is mediated through the internet, and so many of these platforms are from these ideologically skewed tech giants who, we saw recently Count Dankula had his YouTube channel demonetized, right? So they will continually do this. You had the Saga of Account thing and Patreon, right?
Yeah.
So, they will make it as difficult as possible. And of course, to build up, basically what they're saying is you need to build your own internet. And that will happen, but it will take a while. And these people do think they will win through these bullying authoritarian tactics. They won't win, but it's just going to take a long time before it's going to get worse before it gets better, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose in terms of the way the internet responds to things, and the internet that never forgets is a very popular refrain, isn't it? And I suppose harking back to, say, Louis C.K. and even Kevin Hart from some of his historical tweets about gay people and things like that. Is there, what's the statute of limitations on forgiveness? At what point does a tweet sent in 2009, should that inform your current work and current day?
I'm with you. I'm really frightened of this way in which so many activists have now believe there's no such thing as redemption.
Yeah.
I hate this idea. I hate the idea that once someone has made a mistake at any point in their life, and I'm not just talking about being young, at any point in their life, they will never be able to be forgiven. They will be forever stigmatized. This is an almost kind of medieval idea. And this is why I'm prepared to talk to anybody within reason. I mean, I'm not going to sit down and talk to someone who's just a crazy person or racist or irrational. Like, that's the problem. I want to talk to rational people. But I also know that some people have made mistakes in their past, and I want to be able to. I want them to have the opportunity to change and move on, right? But apparently that's not allowed. I mean, Kevin Hart apologized at the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, wasn't it? It was all done and dusted. And then Ellen DeGeneres supports him and says, no, you should still host the Oscars. And everyone attacks her. Then she is, I suppose, what would you call it? Adjacent
complicit.
To
homophobia. I hate this now. Adjacent. You've
adjacent. I get that a lot now.
You've not said anything racist, fascistic, misogynistic, or homophobic, but because we haven't said that and we can't pin anything on you, we're just going to subtly imply you're supporting it silently. From the sidelines, you're adjacent to it. I think that's really dishonest.
I've had that, like, oh, look, here's a photograph of you standing next to a UKIP supporter. So therefore you are now a UKIP supporter. It's not airborne. It's not a contagious thing. Like this is it. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it?
Is it not? Is not part of the problem as well now how easy it is to whip up hysteria and outrage, in the sense that, I mean, years ago you had to at least write a letter and buy a stamp and walk to your post box, and typically you'd probably have calmed down before you got that far.
Exactly.
But now it's free enterprise. You can just vent and you can form a quick mob. And should they not just be a bit policy of maybe people saying, look, we're just not going to respond to online outrage?
Difficult. Like, a lot of this stuff is a small minority of people, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the problem is that they are amplified by the mainstream media. So this is like, when you say, I'll give you an example. So when a few people complained about Friends, when it was the sitcom Friends, when it was put on Netflix, right? It was really just a few tweets saying, oh, this is so homophobic or whatever. But then the BBC reported on it as, oh, millennials are outraged about Friends. So then it becomes a story we have to address, because once the mainstream media are pushing it as being a thing, then we have to talk about it. And so we always have to bear that in mind, and I have to bear that in mind, is that Twitter isn't real life, and sometimes when you see all these people who are outraged and angry, you've just got to remember they're being amplified by something. Most people are still normal. Most people are still good. And most people are still reasonable. And I think that has been lost, not just in terms of comedy and everything else, but also in terms of politics. It's easier to say 17.4 million people are racists than to go and talk to those people and realize, no, very, very few of them are. And most people are generally good. I think it comes down to a belief in humanity. I think I come from the position that people are essentially good. There are a few dicks out there, right? But that's life. But I think the other view comes out of this idea that everyone, particularly the working class, are basically fascists in waiting, and they're just one off-color joke away from enacting a pogrom.
Yeah, that seems to be a common perception at the moment, doesn't it, from the sort of liberal, quote unquote liberal elite, shall we call them? But so something was reported in the Guardian recently about Spiked, and this is Spiked. I really enjoy Spiked as a platform. I really appreciate a lot of the contributors there. These things I've disagreed with there, but it's not a problem for me. I don't think one source needs to be a catch-all for every single thing you've got. You write for Spiked, and it's come under attack recently because they've been linked to the Koch brothers, the big the big conglomerate in America that's responsible for so many brands and think they're worth billions and billions, and they've been accused in the past of political influence via finance, and there's a lot of conspiracies woven in and out of this particular group of brothers, and there was quite a very critical piece of Spiked in that regard in the Guardian. I just wanted to firstly I just wanted to ask you, are you free to write what you want for Spiked? Have you ever been tapped on the shoulder at any point and say you must push this narrative, you must sing to this hymn sheet? And secondly, what's your thoughts on this report in the Guardian?
So I think the worst you could ever say is like Spiked said, "Oh, this story has happened. Would you be interested in talking about it?" That's as far as
that's typical, isn't it? That's typical journalism.
Yeah, and I'm free to say no anyway. I mean, no, absolutely not. So no one has ever said, you have to toe this line, you have to follow this line. It doesn't happen. And I am free to write. I mean, obviously, like with all media platforms, there is an editorial line on certain things. But I'm not. The reason why I write for Spiked is that I tend to agree with them, right? So my articles are a good fit there. That's what I mean. If I wanted to write an article which was more a good fit at The Guardian, I'd submit it to The Guardian, right? That's how that works. In terms of the accusations, which is basically it's an article written by George Monbiot, who is a well-known conspiracy theorist, who is basically rehashing an article he wrote 10, 15 years ago. He's really bought into this ridiculous conspiracy theory about how Spiked has come out of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and it's a group of entryists who basically manipulate culture to get into prominent positions on television and in the media and all this sort of stuff. And he bought into that nonsense a long time ago and hasn't been able to shake it off. And it's really damaged his journalistic objectivity. And in this case, what happened was the Koch brothers provided funding to Spiked for two specific free speech enterprises. One of them was a tour of American universities, which was a tour about free speech. And then the other one was a series of short films which were related to free speech. So actually this was a philanthropic donation which often happens. This is like every major corporation gives money to charities and philanthropic ideas. It's a good thing. Now, I'm not pro corporation. I think there's a lot. Corporations are big behemoths. I despise the greed that's involved with what they do, and I despise the lack of a moral compass there sometimes. But the more money they're giving to good causes, the better, frankly. And that's what was happening here. And I think that's a great thing. But what is not happening is that the Koch brothers are funding Spike and telling them what to write. And I think a lot of this comes down to, there's no editorial control there from the Koch brothers, right? Mm. What it comes down to is the accusation that George Monbiot is pushing is basically the people who write for Spike don't really believe what they say. They're just being paid by these big billionaires to write this stuff for a political agenda. No, that's a bad faith interpretation. We all believe what we say. Just take us on face value. All this nonsense about dark money. Apparently, I'm getting dark money. Like, if it's so dark, in fact, that I've never seen it. Ridiculous. It's utterly stupid. And of course, then you go on Wikipedia, and suddenly someone's amended it and spiked as a Koch-funded, or a wing of the Koch brothers. Like, just do some basic research. What's hilarious about this is George Monbiot from The Guardian emails Spike, says, "Is it true you've been funded for these projects by the Koch brothers?" They say yes. And then he writes an article saying, "Oh, it's all shady, backward dealing." No, you just ask them and they told you. There's no, this isn't a scoop, mate.
It's not like you folded under pressure.
Yeah, you're not finding anything out that no one's willing to admit. Like, you're just peddling your crazy conspiracy nonsense, which has been going on for years, and you need to get over it. He's obsessed with this Revolutionary Communist Party, living Marxism. But I don't want to go into all of that, but it's, the Revolutionary Communist Party hasn't existed for over 20 years. Get over it, you dinosaur.
But I mean, it's an interesting topic, really, in the fact that if you're successful in what you do, people appreciate what you do, and you do earn money doing it. The accusations come that way. It's almost like if you genuinely believed in your views, you'd do it for free. And I suppose that completely misses the point. I mean, I've been accused of taking views to pander for patron support, and I tend to find that I make myself deeply unpopular. I know that there are certain things that I can advocate or put forward that lose me support, and I do it anyway because I actually care about these things. So it is, like you say, it's bad faith, isn't it, to assume that people's convictions or views on the other side conveniently are motivated by finance, whereas you're not. You're sincere and you genuinely believe what you think.
Right. Exactly. This whole mouth for hire idea, and I get that accusation a lot. And it's like, well, you know what? Even if someone is being paid to say the stuff they say, just address the argument. You can still demolish the argument, can't you? But this idea of just guessing what people are really thinking. I mean, this is what I get this all the time. So the people who attack me on Twitter in their stupid articles or whatever are basically, they're attacking someone who doesn't exist. They're attacking someone in their own head. They've decided what I think and what I am. They don't know me, but they've decided these things for themselves, and they are attacking and pouring this bile on this fictional character of their own imagination. I can't argue from a position I don't believe. How can I engage in that argument? Because I'll end up defending things that they think I think rather than things I actually think. I'm only interested in what I actually believe. I do not write things in my articles that I don't believe. I wouldn't do it. There's no point to it. I believe what I say. Just do me the courtesy. Even if you hate what I've got to say, even if you think what I'm saying is rubbish, tell me that then, fine. But don't start from a position of, you don't really believe this, you're being paid by billionaires in America to say it.
Yeah, I agree. I suppose one of the reasons Spike comes under criticism from components of the left is its sort of unwavering pro-Brexit position, and I
guess that's part of it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to get your opinion on the negotiations or lack thereof at the moment. I mean, where do you think we are in terms of Brexit, and do you think there is room for people who voted leave to now maybe think it wasn't the best idea, or do you think it's a case of the government are not implementing the will of the people and kind of letting leave voters down on this score?
I think it's really dangerous to outsource a decision to the public, for Parliament to vote overwhelmingly to do that, then to get the result from the public, then to vote in Parliament to implement that result, right? and then not to do it.
Yeah.
That's a really dangerous thing to do in terms of the legacy, in terms of democracy in this country. It will basically ruin democracy.
Yeah, I can't see how we'd recover from that.
The nonsense arguments about, well, people can change their mind. Yeah, they can, right? But look, when has there ever been a general election where we've voted someone in, but we didn't install that person? We said, no, let's go back and ask them again. No, you're free to vote that person out again, but you've got to implement the decision that's already been decided. Like this is incredibly dangerous stuff. And that I mean, the problem is ultimately that you had Theresa May and the Conservatives who never wanted to leave the EU, and they basically went to Brussels and they saw this as damage limitation rather than an incredible opportunity that it could have been, and therefore they were incapable of negotiating a deal, right? The EU need that 39 billion, right? They're not telling you this. They absolutely need it. We have got the strongest possible position now. And I think we should just walk away. I mean, I'm all for no deal at this point. I think that's exactly what we should do. But I'm more concerned. I don't think it will happen, but I'm more concerned with what this will do for democracy if we don't this. You have a Remain parliament fighting and trying to undermine a Leave country. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a real problem.
It's almost like they're approaching negotiations with an air of reluctance or almost an apologetic approach to these EU overlords.
They want it not to work. They want us to be tied to this block forevermore, and it's and that's, they think they know better, right? Well, that's not how parliamentary democracy works, right? I mean, I'm for parliamentary democracy. But what it is not is people do not vote in their representatives in order to overtly thwart their wishes. They don't do that. That's not what parliamentary democracy is, right? So, and I just worry about where it's going to go. I think there's going to be bad tidings in the future.
Yeah, and I think people are. I mean, it's a daily topic, isn't it, Brexit? It's everywhere you look now, and I think people are getting a bit fatigued with it, and I think it'd be good for the whole public consciousness as a whole if we pushed forward with it and just got to a conclusion, good or bad for the people, so we can move forward.
I think one thing that I really must emphasize, I think it again fits into this idea of, like, I think people need to address their own revisionism and their own revisionist tendencies. So just as someone can look at the video we talked about with the Native American guy, and then in their head they've revised what actually happened. You need to be adult enough to go back and say, no, that's not right. The same thing is with Brexit. So with all the people who were talking about how the vote was advisory, for instance, okay, or talking about how nobody knew what they were voting for, nobody knew we'd be leaving the single market. You've got to, that is a revisionist position, and it's easy to check because there's this wonderful thing called the internet, and you can go there and you can look at all the major speeches, all the major debates, and you can see that in every case, leaving the single market was explicitly mentioned. There's even the biggest debate at Wembley Arena, the biggest televised debate where 10 minutes in, there's a video where the BBC explains to you what the implications of leaving the single market would be. Like, this is mind-numbing revisionism, which you can easily check and have the guts and be adult enough to say, no, I'm wrong about that. Sorry. Yeah, we did all know.
Yeah, I mean, this ties into accusations of Nazism and the current political divide that we've just been touching on there, and I suppose that brings us to Anna Soubry, doesn't it? And she was taunted with Nazi chants outside Parliament, which I'm not a fan of. I think that's a bad move. I think it's inaccurate, if anything. If we're just going to be honest,
historically illiterate for one thing.
Exactly, but she's called for police action on this score. So I mean, that's more of an egregious act to me than shouting a falsehood.
Yeah, that disturbs me far more. And also, I mean, I say it in my show, but if we criminalise calling people Nazis, the left is fucked, basically, because that's their thing, that's their shtick now, right? So, and I mean, look, I don't like Anna Soubry. I don't like the fact that she represents a Leave constituency, and she's just trying to screw them over, basically, because she thinks she knows best. It's actually not moral. I don't think what she's doing. I think we should reserve the right to pass a moral judgment on that. But I also say that she's not a Nazi. She's not a Nazi, and calling her one is not productive. It shouldn't be encouraged. It should be ridiculed and criticised and all the rest of it, as much as when people call me a Nazi, I ridicule them for it. But on the other hand, I don't want it criminalised. Being wrong about someone, being rude to someone, being offensive to someone should never be illegal, because it's not pleasant. I'd love it if we could live in a society where everyone was really polite and nice and they didn't hurt people's feelings. I'd love that. That'd be great. It's not going to happen because of a thing called human nature, So let's just get over this idea that this obsession that if we can just police language, if we can just outlaw certain words, if we can just make it illegal to say certain things, all the bad thoughts will go away. This utopian vision of humanity, which is frankly bollocks. And if you know anything about history, or indeed people, then you know that this isn't true. So we have to move beyond that. But I absolutely do not support Anna Soubry in her view that it should be criminalised. And I'm really troubled by it, actually.
I just think it's amazing that you felt it was necessary to say she's not a Nazi. I mean, that's where we are, isn't it? That's where we are.
I've never met a Nazi, by the way.
Oh, they're very secretive.
I'm told they're everywhere. I've never met one. I mean, that'd be fascinating, by the way. But I just how many are there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a supply and demand issue, isn't there? I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, touching back on politicians and this idea of regulating speech, it troubles me sometimes to think that the people who are chosen to represent us, who are supposed to fight for this country and the will of the people, have incredibly thin skins when it comes to comments and things tweeted at them online. And I just think maybe they should spend a little less time on Twitter. Yeah,
just get off Twitter then. That's the simple thing. I mean, if they are our representatives, they're prominent political people with a lot of clout. So they are going to get this. They're going to get lampooned, aren't they? They're going to get ridiculed. They have to. That's part of the deal. I would not go into politics if I thought I couldn't take that sort of attention. Similarly, I do comedy shows and I perform in public and I get reviewed and I get people writing about me on Twitter and all that sort of stuff. I write political articles. So I know that part of the deal is you're going to get some people, often really unpleasant, nasty people, saying shit about me online.
Yeah.
Or that's part of it. I accept that when I got into this. But, you can't then say, no, I need these people to be arrested now because they're being horrible to me. That's not how it works.
Well, Andrew, this is absolutely flown by again. It's been a pleasure to catch up. It's been an hour already, but I mean, if there's anything specific that you feel that we've not covered that you'd like to get in, you're free to do so.
No, it's all right. I never talk about literature. That's my background, but no one ever asks me about it.
That's the problem, isn't it? We're so consumed by these ridiculous problems that we don't get to talk about the things we love and care about. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that.
Never mind. But yeah, great. I know, I've really enjoyed it.
So where can people find you on Twitter?
They can find me at andrewdoyle_com, or they can go to my website, which is andrewdoyle.co.uk, and I'm on tour at the moment, so come and see me. I'm on tour till I'm a lot funnier than this, by the way. I really do feel like I've got two hats. I do my sort of political side and then the comedy side, and although I am addressing a lot of these issues in the show. But in a more funny, light-hearted, less bitter way.
Yeah, I think one informs the other. I think to a certain extent, to do sort of comedy that's got a bit of oomph to it, I think you almost have to be annoyed about some things.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's probably really good for me, all these people calling me a Nazi.
Yeah, not good for your mental health, but great reviews.
Yeah, exactly. But I am on tour, so all the dates are on my website and everything. So it'd be great if people came along.
Awesome. Andrew, thanks very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Godless Spellchecker podcast. The podcast is a one-man operation, produced in my spare time away from my day job, and I love making it for you. If you enjoy what you hear, please consider lending some support. The show is entirely listener supported. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and given the alternative and unpopular focus of my content, it's very unlikely to find a sponsor. So there are a number of ways you can support and chip in and help improve the show and give me more time to produce more content. You can become a patron supporter and pledge a monetary amount per month or per episode by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. If you can't lend monetary support right now, don't worry, there's other ways you can help the podcast too. You can share it on your various social media networks, or take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to it. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you. Think we've all learned something here today?